Now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening and welcome to Reproaction's monthly Act and Learn webinar for September 2016. We've got an awesome, thought-provoking topic tonight, body image and sexuality, and we're so excited that you've joined us. So first off, who's speaking? Who are your hosts? The first voice you hear right now is me. I'm Erin Matson. I'm based in Arlington, Virginia, and I'm one of the co-founders and co-directors of Reproaction.
And this is Pamela Merritt. I'm based in St. Louis, Missouri, and I'm the other co-founder and co-director of Reproaction.
So we are a team. So let's get started. Our agenda, very briefly, we're going to introduce Reproaction. Then we're going to hand it over to our campaign lead, Katie OConnell, who's going to talk us through some things about body image and sexuality. From there, we're going to move into a panel discussion. First, we'll have a conversation with our first guest panelist, Dianne Bondy of Dianne Bondy Yoga. And then we're going to have a discussion with Frances Reed of Freed Bodyworks. We're very excited about both of our panelists tonight. We'll touch on next steps and then we'll do a Q&A session. Now, let me tell you about that. If at any point you have questions for the panelists, for the Reproaction staff, just general questions, feel free to chat those into the chat box. We'll get to as many of them as possible in Q&A at the end, but you certainly don't have to wait until Q&A to type in your questions for that time. We encourage you to live tweet. Our hashtag for live tweeting is Reproaction. So who is Reproaction? It's us. We're a new direct action group forming to increase access to abortion and advance reproductive justice. We're incredibly proud of our independent left flank analysis, of our willingness to hold folks on all sides of our issues accountable, whether they're traditionally thought of as allies or opposition, and our deep and proud, firm commitment to nonviolent direct action as a way of bringing about progress. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Katie OConnell, who's our campaign lead with Reproaction. She's joining us from Alexandria, Virginia tonight. Katie, thank you so much for being here.
Hey, thank you so much. I'm really excited. I'm going to be doing an introduction to the topic of body image and sexuality. So I'll be discussing what body image is, what impacts it, and the body positivity movement. So let's first discuss what is body image and what does that concept mean. Body image is the way that we conceptualize and see our own bodies. It's basically how we relate to the skin that we're in. And body image is impacted by our personal experiences, by socialization, and by other external factors. It doesn't exist in a vacuum, and how people feel about their bodies lies on a spectrum. So, even the most body positive people have bad days, which is totally valid and okay. So on to the things that impact body image. First, I'm going to talk about gender identity, which is a major factor that impacts body image. For trans and genderqueer people, existing in their bodies in society that says they should not can be a really uphill battle. And feeling dysphoria, which is feeling like your body doesn't match your identity and who you are as a person, can create a lot of tension for people that negatively impacts body image and, in turn, how one feels about sex and physical intimacy. Cis people, which is people who identify with a sex that they were assigned at birth, don't necessarily think about what it means to live in this culture and political climate that is so hostile, transphobic, and working to criminalize trans bodies. But it absolutely takes a toll. So race, ethnicity, and color that impact our perceptions of ourselves. We all know that racism is toxic, and it's created conceptions of people's bodies that are deeply harmful, including hypersexualization and also desexualization that's dependent on one's race and ethnicity. Furthermore, the beauty standard is wholly created to uphold white supremacy. So the lighter one's skin, the more European one's features, like having straight hair or a small nose or light eyes, means that someone is considered beautiful in society. And obviously this has serious and real ramifications for people who don't fit those expectations that harm body image and conception of self. Sex and sexuality can be complicated by racial fetishization and also other ideas that people of color are undesirable in society. Weight, and particularly as rings true to me as a fat-identified woman, cultural narratives around bodies are very fat-phobic. And the beauty standard praises slim bodies above all else. So if you have fat or fat rolls, cellulite, your body parts jiggle, you weigh more than you're quote-unquote supposed to, or you take up more space than you're supposed to, you can end up feeling really bad about your body. So a lot of body positivity in that movement revolves around disrupting narratives that are fat-shaming, and I'm going to get to that in just a minute. So we can go to the next slide. So we have more discussion of what impacts body image. Experience with eating disorders due to myriad reasons contribute to people's concepts of their self and their sexuality. 20 million women and 10 million men struggle with eating disorders in the US, which is staggering. And often when people have eating disorders, they seldom feel satisfied with what their bodies look like, which contributes to painful feelings, making people's experiences with sex and sexuality suffer as well. As a sexual assault survivor, I know firsthand that body image suffers as a result from trauma. In the aftermath, I felt like my body was no longer mine, and I felt like I didn't have control over what I did with it. And I think that that is a very common feeling around body image for people who've experienced sexual assault. So certain body parts felt very alien to me, and I really intentionally disconnected from my own body. Sex became very complicated as a result, and even now requires that I set very concrete boundaries with partners to make me feel safe and positive in my body within the context of that experience. Moving on, I'm also someone who has a disability, and I know firsthand the way that people see the bodies of people with disabilities. We're seen as defective, unattractive, and not sexual, and so obviously it's really natural for people to internalize those harmful narratives. Particularly people with physical and mental disabilities are desexualized, they're forcibly sterilized, and caregivers even force some people to have procedures that prevent puberty. There's a lack of sex education and discussion of healthy sexuality that focuses on people with disabilities, and it means that people feel like they don't have sexual agency. And so those narratives and narratives that devalue our bodies also harm our body image. Age is another factor because harmful cultural narratives exist around age and aging, and in particular for women. So women are told that their bodies become worthless as we age. And obviously internalizing this will really negatively impact how you see yourself as you get older. But in contrast, which is, positive, like many women can also celebrate their age and particularly look at it from a body positive lens. So there are ways of looking at aging, which means that, we've survived in this society, and what people see as quote unquote imperfections like stretch marks, cellulite, scars, wrinkles, those are all marks of how we've gotten through this world. There are also many assumptions and stereotypes about women's sexuality and sex drive as they age, despite research that shows women of all ages are, equally interested in sex. Naturally, sexual identity impacts people's sexuality. There's clearly growing acceptance of people who aren't heterosexual, but there's still a lot of harm and stigma. Legalizing gay marriage didn't automatically get rid of harmful ideas about queer folks, and conceptions that queer sexual identities are deviant and wrong still exist. But in contrast, the way we express our sexual identity can also be really awesome for our body image. I'm a femme-identified person, and I feel a lot of power from my outward expression of this identity, and embracing being femme feels radical and disruptive to me. And so finally, and I've really touched on this throughout, but society, the ways in which other people and cultural ideas interact with our bodies has a significant impact on how we feel and how we relate to them and our sexuality. So you can go to the next slide. So let's talk about the body positivity movement, which I touched on earlier. And basically the body positivity movement intends to upend traditional negative narratives about our bodies and help people be positive about all bodies. There are some issues with the traditional body positivity movement, and that's why there is more radical offshoots and discussions that focus on what the mainstream movement is lacking. So some people critique this mainstream movement for its whiteness, the lack of nuance about why people have negative feelings about their bodies, and the lack of gender identity diversity within the movement. So body image is complicated, right? I noted that the body positivity movement can lack nuance, and that's really what I want to talk about here. People aren't totally positive about their bodies all the time, and that's okay. Telling people to always love their bodies no matter what really isn't realistic to the human experience. And it negates like very valid feelings people have that are perpetuated by social harm. So, you know, our complicated body images mean that people aren't always going to be comfortable with sex, nudity, and sexual intimacy. And part of being sex and body positive is recognizing this, that being uncomfortable with sex because of a difficult relationship to your body, whether it's because you're a sexual assault survivor, or you're a trans person, or you're a fat person, or all of the above. It's not being sex negative. It's just, you know, people's lived realities. So other people don't like certain body parts being touched, and they don't like to participate in certain types of sex. As a trauma survivor, some things in sex are really loaded for me, and I can't disconnect them from the painful experiences of sexual assault. That being said, I'm a person who feels really comfortable and confident in my sexuality. So people, you know, are allowed to have discomforts and still feel good about themselves. It's crucial to know what your boundaries are with sex so that you can have positive experiences. Partners' attitudes can also make sex complicated. If you're a member of a group that's been historically hypersexualized, like Black women and Asian women, it can feel loaded when someone is attracted to you because it's unclear if you're being seen as the unique person you are, or if you're being fetishized by that partner. And then sexual partners also may think that people will always engage in certain sexual practices based on their identities. So there are like stereotypes that fat women are so desperate for sex and intimacy that they'll say yes to anything. You know, these things are not true and they're harmful. So finally, let's talk about how body image can impact sexuality. And as I've talked about, you know, everyone has bad days, bad thoughts, and bad moments, which can make sex really complicated and pull people out of moments they want to be in. But even in bad moments, sex can be a really important and impactful way to connect with your body in a very radical way. So you can, by freely expressing your sexuality, when you come from a group that's oppressed, that can be really awesome and affirming and powerful. So these things are like really, they're very deeply connected. And I think that it tends to be a lot more complicated and nuanced than we usually think.
All right, thank you so much, Katie. I'm going to put you on mute and unmute Dianne Bondy, who's one of our panelists. And Dianne is the founder of Dianne Bondy Yoga. If you are not following her on social media, you are really missing out. You need to correct that ASAP. This is a woman who has made several viral videos that have traveled the world of body positive yoga. And she's going to be speaking with us tonight about radical self-love. And I just have to say, I also consider Dianne a personal friend as well as inspiration and leader in the body positive movement, and was just really proud to share a stage with her a couple of years ago when we both spoke at an event for eating disorder survivors. And I love your work, Dianne. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Erin. I'm really so grateful to be on this panel, and I resonated with so much of what Kate had said around body positivity. And I'm part of, I like to commit to making a change, right? I like to be a disruptor in this entire imagery that we see around women. So I've always called myself kind of a pushback person. I never really fit into the mold of what people thought I should be doing or what people thought I should be talking about. And very much in the yoga community, we have a lot of body image problems. we only see certain bodies represented in the yoga community, and particularly in the mainstream yoga community. So take a minute to think about some of the mainstream yoga magazines out there. There's one in particular that doesn't pay any attention to creating any kind of cultural diversity in its publication, doesn't have any body diversity in its publication, and when it does offer those up, it's really tokenizing. They don't really make an effort to make yoga look like a place where everybody's included. So I became a yoga teacher probably about 20 years ago, and I've been practicing yoga for about 43 years, and when I stepped outside of my home, because that was primarily where I was practicing, and stepped into the yoga culture, I noticed there weren't people like me practicing yoga, and there weren't people who looked like me teaching yoga. And I felt that was really problematic in bringing accessibility to yoga for people who are generally underrepresented in this population. So this was really problematic for me. So I decided that I was going to create a space that everybody felt welcome, and that I was going to put myself out there to disrupt the image that we saw of yoga bodies. Thin, fair-skinned, flexible, young, able-bodied, cisgendered, right? These are all the images that we see in modern-day yoga. So I thought it was my duty as a yoga teacher to help shift consciousness around how we see yoga, and ultimately how we talk about and see our bodies. I thought it was amazing how we talk about body image, and particularly the body positive movement right now. We have to be very careful how we navigate that movement. I've been noticing that the body positive movement has been co-opted a lot by mainstream media, particularly by the diet industry. When the diet industry is talking to us about be body positive and trying to sell you a weight loss product. And this constant ideal around the thin ideal. You'll be happier if you're thinner, right? And this whole idea that you cannot be healthy at a heavier weight. So I was really concerned with changing the way we talked about our bodies, not only in yoga, but in the mainstream as well. So I took up yoga very young, and I never realized that there was anything to be criticized about by my body when I was younger until I started seeing images. So I grew up in the 70s, and in the 70s, there was very little positive images of Black people in mainstream media. So I grew up in the era of Charlie's Angels, right, where everybody was petite and thin and white, and I could never find a role model or somebody I could look up to in mainstream media that didn't have some kind of stereotypes surrounded around them. Like there was never a positive image of a Black woman when I was growing up. Either we were poor, we lived in the ghetto, we were maids. There was never somebody out there who was too strong. So I decided in my life I wanted to show a positive image of what we can do with our lives. I really wanted to be someone that you could identify with, that you would look up and you would see somebody that looked like you, either in mainstream media or particularly on the yoga mat. So I found that my body image took a beating when I started noticing what mainstream media was offering me in terms of what a yogi looked like. So I decided, when I first opened my yoga studio, I had a yoga studio for about 10 years, I never put pictures of myself in the advertising because I was really come to a yoga studio that was owned by a Black woman, and a fat Black woman at that. So I identify as a fat person, and I don't see, what I want to say is I own being a fat person. I don't let the word fat become a negative connotation for me, and I know that's not for everybody, but for me, I want to reclaim that word as fabulous, as acceptable, as triumphant, all those things that make me what I am. And part of that is being fat. And I really wanted other people to see that you can be fat and teach yoga, and you can be fat and do yoga, and you can be fat and be considered attractive, and that we get to determine our own self-worth, and we get to define how we see ourselves, and we no longer need to let other people define who we are or how we see ourselves. So I'm all about pushing back against negative stereotypes. The truth about stereotypes is that they're not necessarily untrue, but they're only one story, right? They're only one story. And it's important that we have many stories in this narrative. So I wanted to encourage people to step this idea that you had to be a certain size, that you had to fit a certain stereotype to be part of the yoga community. So coming back to my body image issues, I never had a body image issue around yoga, I should say, until I started stepping into yoga studios and noticed that I was always the big brown spot in the room. So I created a space that could be encouraging and inviting. And I started putting my pictures up on social media of me in this body doing yoga and encouraging other people to put their pictures up as well. So that's the disruption. The beauty of social media is we no longer have to wait for somebody to give us a platform. We can create our own platform and we can start to change the narrative. We can push back. We can say, this is not acceptable. We can speak up against fat shaming. We can speak up against politics. We can speak up against abuse. And that's been an amazing platform for a lot of people. And it's helped me to be a disruption in the media around yoga and around what Black people do. So there's this idea that Black people don't do yoga, but there's a lot of stuff there doing mindfulness practices. And I found that my mindfulness practice through yoga gave me the courage to step into my power, gave me the courage to be okay with the skin that I was in, and to encourage other people to be okay with the skin that they're in. I'm all about body love and radical self-love, but I would like to get to a place where at least if we can't get to radical self-love, we can get to body neutrality, right? That you can stop looking in the mirror at yourself and picking apart the things that you don't like based on somebody else's opinion of what you should look like, right? Mm-hmm. So it's really important for me to create a platform for everybody to be involved. So I share a lot of stuff on my social media. I do a lot of talks. I share my experiences with people. Telling our stories is very important. And when Kate was giving the introduction, so much of her story was like my story. And that makes me feel connected. It makes me feel like I'm part of a community that understands. So there's power in our stories, and talking about our stories and being open with our stories encourages other people to step out and tell their stories. And then from those storytellings, we create a community. And it's only through community that we can step out of our self-hate. It's only through community that we can push back against unfair representations of us, unfair ideals, unfair stereotypes. So it's really great if you can step up and speak out about these things, but it's so much better if you have a community of people around you who can share the message. So that led me to creating the Yoga and Body Image Coalition, which I'm on the leadership team with my friend Melanie Klein, and we decided together that we were going to create an organization, a coalition of many voices, creating many images to push back out there in mainstream media, and it's taken off. People are now interested in yoga that is beyond this ideal of beauty, right? Yoga is not an ideal of beauty. It's a way to get to know yourself, but because it's been commercialized and feminized and made something that's elite, that only rich, able-bodied people can participate in, we wanted to shift the narrative to say that everybody is welcome here. We wanted to take the fear out of people's ideas of what a yogi should look like. And we created a campaign, a t-shirt campaign, which was #WhatAYogiLooksLike. And we wanted people to start posting pictures on Instagram and on social media of them doing yoga poses, whether you were in a wheelchair, whether you're a person who's practicing with a disability, whether you are a person who identifies as transgender, whether you're a person who has like a diverse ethnicity. We wanted as many of those pictures to be pushed out into the media. And what ended up happening is the media got interested because, of course, they can see a way to make money around it, right? So they became interested, and they started also pushing out our images into the mainstream. So you'll see a complete shift in what a yogi looks like based on our disruption and based on other people joining the movement, based on a community of creating disruption. I think there's definitely a link between how you look at yourself and how you interact with the world. Your body image is something that can keep you from living your best life, right? Because you're afraid of what other people will think. It keeps you from having intimate relationships because you don't want somebody to see your bottom. I remember when I was about 19 years old, talking to my girlfriend who was in her early 20s, and we were talking. I hadn't had sex yet, and she was having a sexual relationship. And she used to say to me, it's very important when you start having sex, don't ever let them see your bum. This was like her motto for this. Wow. And then I kind of internalized that. And for a long time, I wouldn't want to get naked in front of somebody, or the lights always had to be out, or I didn't want to be touched in certain ways. And, you know, not to say that doesn't still happen, but at least I'm aware of it, and I can start an internal dialogue with myself around, why do I feel this way? And what can I do to change my perspective around this? What can I do to understand that I'm in a committed, loving relationship and the person who's touching me is not commenting on my body, right? That this is, you know, from a place of intimacy and love. And it, you know, it took me a really long time to get there, but I have to say that my yoga practice connected me to my body in a way that I could appreciate it, in a way that I understood that my body wasn't something I had to overcome. My body wasn't something that I had to apologize. And anybody else's opinions of my body was none of my business. So it was really, that was the thing that really blew my whole perception of myself wide open, was this understanding that through my mindfulness practices that I'm connected to something that's much bigger. And through my mindfulness practices, I learned that I could have an appreciation for my body. And you know, one of the biggest things that flipped my perspective around my body was having a baby. I thought to myself, what an incredible miracle that my body can build an entire other human being and then sustain that human being. I can feed that human being from my body forever. And it really started to shift the way I looked at my body, and I tried more to focus on the things that my body can do and be compassionate to the things my body cannot do, whether it be in my yoga practice or whether it be in my real life. But I thought it was really important that I started to shift that narrative so that I don't pass that same conversation down to my children, right? Because we're getting to a point in media and culture where we're not only criticizing women's bodies, we're now criticizing men's bodies, and we're creating this whole ridiculous ideal. Whenever I go to the grocery store and I'm standing with my sons in the aisle, I always point out the magazines and I ask them, when you look at these magazines, what are the messages that you're getting? So I always want to have a really open and collaborative conversation with my kids and the images that they're constantly getting. I can't control that, but I want to have a conversation around it. So when we start talking about body image with our children, we have to be careful because the negative commentary around body image is really insidious. Even though you're talking to your child about positive body image and about accepting who they are, they're getting external messages from everywhere else telling them that they're not good enough. And so it's really, really important that we continue an open conversation with our kids, that we're not criticizing our bodies or other people's bodies in front of our children, and that we want them to have a healthy perception of themselves and ultimately a healthy perception of sex, because we've grown up in a culture where for a long time women weren't supposed to enjoy sex, right? You were supposed to tolerate sex. And it's only, I want to say, in the last 30 or 40 years that it's shifted, that it's okay for us to enjoy our bodies. And I think it's really important to teach children, to teach ourselves that our bodies are for our enjoyment only. Our bodies are for our enjoyment only. And if you choose to share it with somebody else, that's great. But nobody gets to take advantage of you. Nobody gets to comment on your body. And you're free to tell people to mind their own business when they're commenting on your body. Or call them out. Or call them out when they're commenting on anybody's body. I want to get to a place where when we compliment each other, it's not a physical thing. We compliment each other on the brightness of our spirit, on our ability to collaborate, you know, on our ability to be in community, as opposed to what we constantly look like. The focus has to shift to what's internal. And I think at this point in history, and this point in our lives, that we're on the precipice of breaking through this. I mean, conversations like this that happen monthly around body image and sexuality is proof that we are shifting, right? That we are shifting the way we look at each other. We're shifting the conversation about what's important. And I think it's very important to continue to be part of that conversation. So for me, sexuality is just another way I have a conversation with another person. It's just another way that I get to enjoy my own body. My body has done so many amazing things, and it is worthy of my love and not my criticism.
Oh, Diane, that is just beautiful. And I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. You are just an inspiration. Diane has given us tons of food for thought. So I'm going to put you on mute, and we're going to go next to Francis. But if folks have questions for Diane, feel free to chat them into the question or put them into the question box, and we will get to as many of those as possible. Thank you, Diane.
Thank you.
Great. All right. So now I am unmuting Frances, and I'm going to pass it to Pamela.
Thank you very much. That was so exciting. Frances Reed is a gender fluid massage therapist who owns Freed Bodyworks in Washington, D.C. And thank you so much for joining us, Frances. Frances, do we have you?
Katie, are you?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh.
Are you there,
Can you
Frances?
hear me? Oh, okay, you can hear me now.
Hey, awesome. It's like a commercial. Okay, so thank you so much for joining us, Frances.
Yes, sorry about that. I was talking and thanking you for the invitation. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm really excited to be on this panel.
No problem. So I have some questions for you, and I'll start off with, so your bodywork practice, Freed Bodyworks, practices radical inclusion. So tell me more about that. What does that mean to you?
Well, a little bit of history on the business and my work will get us to that point. When I, 7 or 8 years ago now, went to massage school, I was just beginning to really unpack my own gender identity. And so I was at, very exploratory places in terms of my gender expression. And I go to massage school, which is this intensely physical and physically vulnerable place. And I assumed I would meet other sort of body renegades. And quite to my surprise, I got there and everyone was very normative, both in their mindsets and in their bodies. Certainly there was, body image diversity, but no concept of gender, no concept of my gender and what it meant to be me. So I spent 2.5 years plodding my way through massage school, noticing that no one that I was that I was learning these skills with was going to really know how to deal with gender fluid bodies in the world. And that really spoke to me. Most of the people I was doing my practice massages on were telling me, I would never, ever, ever, ever get a massage except it's you, and so I know I can. And that spoke volumes to me. So the day after I graduated, I founded my practice specifically with this notion of radical inclusion to create a space where the healing work of massage, therapeutic massage, could be available to people who are gender nonconforming. And at the time, gender nonconformity was where my brain really was, but it didn't take very long before I realized that my practice needed to articulate that I was I was catering to gender nonconforming folks, size nonconforming folks, and lifestyle nonconforming folks. And so for the first couple of years of my practice, that was kind of my tagline, or that was my concept, and radical inclusion was my tagline, because I was really speaking within communities. The only places I was really advertising were places inside communities where people were already talking about empowerment around non-normative bodies. And so radical inclusion to me was this very simple notion that everybody belongs, and that in my practice you could come any shape, any size, using your body for any lifestyle or professional choices, and you weren't going to catch shit from me for it, which was very much my personal politics, and I was a solo practitioner at the time. And then I decided that I would grow the business through a series of misadventures, and I decided to grow the business, which is now 20 people strong. We're a 5-year-old business, and suddenly I had to figure out what radical inclusion meant for a large team of people who hive brain is a thing, but you can't, we have to constantly be training ourselves and each other. And so what radical inclusion really ends up meaning is that regardless of perceptions of your body by yourself or by others, you're not going to encounter barriers to your care at my business, at Freed Bodyworks, if we can help it. We are still human, and we all have internalized all the crap. And so what our commitment is to our clients is to never stop working on unlearning and to do the work in advance of people showing up. So I may not have a client, with a particular identity, but that doesn't mean I'm not really examining my stuff around that identity, so that when they do show up, I can not say whatever the really cliche and hurtful thing might be to them out of good intentions. So it's putting the work on us. And as I included so many more people, it was wonderful because I was able to. It was a very self-selecting bunch, and so people who wanted to work at Freed were people who were really fired up about body positivity, inclusiveness. We are basically a team of activists who happen to be holistic professionals. And so all of a sudden, the things we were concentrating on really began to grow. And so we were being held accountable to the fact that we really needed to step up in terms of bodies of different abilities, racial and ethnic divisions that hide so far below the surface, but really are based in perceptions of body, being trauma informed, and then unseen issues like neurodiversity issues, and having access regardless of many forms of ability. And basically, I say if you get to Freed and there's not a seat at the table for your identity, we're pulling out the chair. So that's radical inclusion in my book.
So I'm now sitting here secretly hoping that you develop franchises in the Midwest. That is awesome. Thank you so much. That is so inspiring, and I'm only half joking. So how does your gender fluid identity inform your work and your relationships?
Well, as I mentioned about the way in which I came to be inspired to form this business, it was through my own experience of gender fluidity and going through a time of really trying to wrap my mind and my existence around presenting my body to the world. And, there's a self-awareness that comes with that. You can't deny it. I think one of the things that privilege does is it, of all forms, it means that you're never forced to self-examine. And that lack of self-awareness, self-examination means that someone coming from a place of gender privilege might not ever have really thought about how much complexity is there. And so that self-awareness about my body and about how aligning my inside and my outside, how much that changed how well I was in myself, having that knowledge gave me, it touches everything in my work and personal relationships. It's just sort of one of those things, like it's so thoroughly defines who I am. Like Diane, I've made my public persona and my career out of, trying to really be I love Diane saying creating disruption is her thing. And I'm like, yeah, I have created a career out of creating some disruption around this notion that this stuff doesn't exist in a really big way. And so I was inclined to start a business that was based on identity marketing, right? Like people, when I was starting my business, people were telling me, oh, you should just try to do, open a practice, and the people who will be your clients will be the people who live nearby. Don't try to be a niche. People won't travel to get massage. And I said, you don't know my people. Like, I know people who feel unseen will travel to be seen. And so I pushed against every business advisor that I had at that time in my life. And, you know, I was right. I have clients that, which is very satisfying, by the way. I have clients who come down from, the furthest away is, I have a client who comes down from Philadelphia. But we have Baltimore clients, certainly. We have people coming from all over the metro region of DC to be seen in this one Capitol Hill practice, which is unusual for massage. Most people don't like to go very far. But again, those are people who have body privilege that allows them to go to any spa, any place, and feel entitled to be there. Mm-hmm. And people who don't really will seek it out, and the loyalty that comes with that is huge. As an individual therapist, my gender identity and my search for understanding of my own gender, my own sexuality, the ways in which discord in those areas of my life caused me to have to really examine who is my family and gather my chosen family close to me. So many things were not given. The assumptions, the defaults, they didn't work. And so I was working on all of those things. And so when a client sits down with me, all of that openness in me of the fact that I think the entire canvas is up for discussion, right? I take nothing for granted about what somebody, if the outside looks like this, then they must believe this on the inside. I really am conditioned to be sitting with somebody and say, you tell me who you are. I'm gonna go by whatever it is you tell me. And so I sit with all new clients for 30 minutes before their first session. I ask every client, regardless of how normative, I ask them what their pronoun preferences are. We actually ask it on our intake paperwork. We work with preferred names, and if somebody's preferred name differs from their legal name, they'll never hear their legal name spoken in our practice. I ask questions that come out of, being really trauma-informed, dealing with so many marginalized identities. It's so very common for trauma to be on my table. And so I ask questions of every client. Is there any part of your body you don't like touched? Are there things that I can do to support you in your comfort on the table? Things that are going to invite people to tell me more about their identity. And I think that's the big difference, is that when somebody else who doesn't necessarily have the life experience around identity that I have sits down with a client, they've got some pieces of information to get, they're boom, 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 and they're not stopping, they're not prioritizing the stopping and spending time with those identity things. That has, like I said a minute ago, people who will travel and they're loyal. The people who I have client relationships with over time are remarkably deep connections, and they're remarkably transformative. And it becomes a place where people aren't just open with me about their back pain, but they're open with me about how their back pain is influencing their sex life, something that most people really wouldn't tell their massage therapist. And it gives me a chance to be total, I don't stigmatize anything. So people will tell me all kinds of things. And I know that means I provide better care to my clients than I would without that information.
Wow. Thank you so, so much. I'll put in one more plug that we need franchises. And thank you so much.
If you have an angel investor out there who would like to give me an infusion of capital, I could make a franchise model and we would be all over it. You are not the first city to ask. Bring me the angel investor, and I will bring you a franchise.
All right, we're going to have to talk offline about this. You've got me sold. Francis, thank you so, so much. And if you'll hold on, we're going to go through some basic business towards the end of some upcoming cool stuff that we want people to save the date for. And then we're going to have a Q&A.
All right, so with that, just briefly, what can you do? So the first thing we want to do is encourage you all to explore radical self-love, to dig in deeper at the body is not an apology. So it's thebodyisnotanapology.com. We want to encourage you to support local activists and businesses who are affirming of all bodies. So it's physically impossible to have Dianne Bondy and Francis Reed in your city at the same time because they're in different places. But if you have either of them in your city, you're encouraged to patronize their business and look out for other good folks, right? And also, you can examine your own experience with your body and how you view the bodies of other people. Inner work is some of the most important work in the movement for full reproductive justice and for inclusion of all people. One other note that I'd like to say parenthetically that's very important, and I say this as someone who is an eating disorder survivor, it's very important. I never want to give the impression that you can self-help your way out of an eating disorder. And so if you came onto the line tonight because you struggle with negative self-image or you have an eating disorder in particular, please do seek professional help. 800-931-2237 is the National Eating Disorders Association helpline, and they can help connect you with therapists and medical professionals in your own area. And there is absolutely zero shame in seeking help. And then I also want to encourage everyone here to plug into our Reproaction campaign. So if you go to reproaction.org, you can sign up for our emails. You won't miss a thing. We do these webinars every single month, and they focus on specific topics to really help us dive in more, dig deeper, think harder. We'll also do things like training some months, so we'd love to see more of these. Please also follow us on social media where we are Reproaction on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And then last but not least, I want to encourage you to save the date for our next Act and Learn webinar. It's going to be on Thursday, October 20th. And we're going to be talking about something pretty strange. We're going to be talking about how some pharmacies are not putting emergency contraception on the shelf, even though it's been years since the FDA authorized it for sale unrestricted on the shelf, regardless of age or gender or any sorts of restrictions. And so we're going to dig deeper into not just what's happening, where emergency contraception should be, but also some real tangible activist things that you can do if you notice something's a little sketchy at your local pharmacy and ways to push back. And so with that, I'm going to unmute all of our panelists and pass it back to Pamela for any Q&A, and feel free to put questions in the question box.
Thank you very much. So right now we do not have any questions from attendees. So again, we encourage you to please put your questions in the question box, which is on the GoToWebinar control panel. Most likely it's situated to the right of your screen, and you just click down, type in your question, and I will read it to our wonderful panelists.
So this is Erin. In the absence of questions, I'd love to jump in and just throw this out to both of our panelists. Diane had brought up, because I think another way that this interacts with sexuality is pregnancy, and Diane had started touching on that, but specifically, as someone who's an eating disorder survivor myself, I found that when I became pregnant with my daughter, it was like a whole new way of experiencing this, and even starting to see things like even pregnant bodies and how we talk about pregnant bodies. Like there's pregnancy-related fat talk, but just specifically, people seem to think it's perfectly socially acceptable to ask you how much weight you've gained. There's talk about, getting your body back. So I just love to hear you both kind of touch on that as well, your thoughts on how this interacts with pregnancy.
Well, I'm going to jump in here. One thing that really just irks me is this whole idea that there's a body to get back after pregnancy, that somehow your body left you and you have to get it back somehow. We spend a lot of time like in this community as women completely mesmerized by this idea that you have to bounce back after pregnancy, like 6 weeks after you give birth, you have to be back into your pre-pregnancy weight, and that you're, and then there's a hard time for a lot of people because your body just changes after pregnancy. It's just different, it created a life. And I would really like to call up organizations that continually put pressure on new mothers to be back in their bathing suit ready bodies. And by the way, your body is always ready for a bathing suit. Just put one on, go in the water, I'm tired of this whole idea that we have to get something back, but you didn't lose anything. You gained another human being.
Absolutely.
That's a great question, and thank you so much for those answers. So I'm not seeing any.
Can I chime in on the pregnancy?
Yes, please
do.
I
wanted to say on the pregnancy part, one of the big things that our practice is focused on is changing the language very subtly, but changing the language around pregnancy to make room for people who don't identify as women who are carrying babies. And it is very interesting to see how attached people are to talking about mothers. We've had people come to teach at Freed, and we've said we really want you. We're not going to advertise this as for mothers. We're going to advertise it for parents to be, and we're not going to say specifically mother this or mother that, because we want the people on our list. Having a list of clients who are of marginalized or non-normative identities gives me a lot of room to say to people, nope, that's not going to fly with our people. So changing that conversation and making room for, and that's trans men carrying babies, but that's also people who are non-binary identified or simply don't want to be heavily identified with the femaleness of their body. There are a lot of people that just would just rather that be sort of downplayed. So I think around, I am not someone who has created life inside me. I have watched in awe many people who have. So I tip my hat to you all. And I know that, my job is to try and make as much room for as many people who want to do that, to do it in a way that affirms who they are, and they don't have to take 9 months off of being a man or 9 months off of feeling gender neutral or like.
Thank you for that. So we still have space and time if people want to drop in some questions. And I'm not seeing additional questions right now.
What? Are you guys there? I'm getting some weird feedback.
I'm getting feedback too, but yes, we are still here.
Okay, great. One of the questions that had been passed to me in advance that I didn't end up answering was, how do you think the relationship between body image and sexuality can strengthen? And for me, one of the big ways to do this is to stop avoiding the topic of sex everywhere. And so, we don't talk about sex. We act like it's something so much more taboo than, it's another biological process, right? We'll talk about pooping before we'll talk about sex, and why? These are things that we do, and we all do them, and I don't know why pretending we don't. one of the big ways that's manifest in our business is that, we said we were going to do workshops about healthy sexuality and healthy relationships, and we were going to be open to talking to our clients about healthy sexuality and healthy relationships. And people, gasped in fear that you can't put sex and massage in the same place. That's terrible. No, you can't talk about the two in the same place. They'll think you're prostitutes. And I just kind of said, yeah, well, I'm going to take that risk. And we've stood very solidly against some big critics, saying that sexuality is a part of wellness. It's a part of wellness in your body. It's a part of forming the kind of body awareness that helps you conquer the things that we've been fed about body image. And as a professional with a platform, a social media platform, a physical building where people come, a person who gets put on panels, I have an opportunity to continually talk about sex as though it is the natural part of life and natural part of bodies that it is. And I think that's a huge way for it to be strengthened. The mainstream body positivity movement wants nothing to do with sex.
Interesting.
So that is often a failing. They want, because it's really trying to express a lot of commentary on the over-sexualization of women's bodies, and I think we can do that and still talk about being sexual beings and being healthy and how we draw our own boundaries and experience our own pleasure.
Thank you for that. So we do have a question, and so we have an attendee who was asking, was wondering what strategies for dealing with people giving unsolicited advice on what you should do about the current state of your body. And this attendee says that they usually sit there and just take it.
Oh. Yeah. If you feel comfortable, I'm a cursor. I just tell people to F off or mind their own business. Or my new favorite saying is, instead of trying to fix my body, why don't you try fixing the world, right? I'm pretty outspoken. And again, I always tell people, like, my body's really none of your business. I don't really appreciate you commenting on it. And I think because we don't tell people that it's not appropriate to comment, people continue to comment. Like, if I say something that offends somebody, I would hope that they would come and say to me, what you said was offensive, and then I can learn to stop saying it, right? I think it's really important that we find our voice, right? That we speak up when injustice is happening to us, when people are commenting about us, and to the larger picture, right? You cannot talk about body positivity without talking about fat phobia, without talking about the injustices that are going on in the world for people of color. So we have to speak up. So when somebody's criticizing you, and my dad likes to criticize me quite a bit, I just tell him flat out, it's none of your business, and why don't you, work on your own body if you're so concerned about changing somebody's body, change your own, right? Like, I think we have to speak up.
Yeah.
Right? You just have to speak up. Just don't, we're behind you. You have a community here. Weigh in, talk to your friends, but speak up and say, this is not appropriate, and I don't appreciate your comment.
Frances, did you have perspective?
I am over here cheering you on, Diane. Absolutely. I also really understand that there are times where speaking up for yourself in those moments really feels impossible. It feels like you can't get the words out your mouth. It feels like it might be dangerous. It feels like a lot of things. And I want to say two things to that. One, it is always okay, and you shouldn't shame yourself for not saying anything back. Simply walking away, simply letting it roll off your, back as best you can. Like, let that be okay. Because if that's the right thing to do in that moment, if that takes the best care of you, if being non-confrontational, then that's good for you. And you've done an empowered thing, regardless of what it looked like from the outside. Mm-hmm. The other thing I want to say, though, and this comes from, I think, a particular aspect of when gender identity is one of the things that is affecting your body image and being commented on. The thread with body image and body negativity is that people of normative bodies feel entitled to comment on any of it, right? We ask transgender folks what surgeries they've had. We ask, how many pounds have you gained in your pregnancy? My God, these questions are awful, right? And in gender identity, it comes up a lot around misgendering. And so that has felt many times for me in many environments like something I couldn't confront people on. There just wasn't the right kind of internal support for me to do that. And so my suggestion comes from that experience, which is to say that my community that surrounds me, my coworkers, the people who really do see me, when a moment far removed from all that criticism, when I can say to them, hey, there is a particular kind of paralysis for me when somebody launches into the fact that they, them, there is grammatically incorrect. I can't fight that fight in that moment. But I would be really, really honored if you would stand up for me. And it would help me feel like I could be in those places. And it was very hard to ask people to do that the first few times I did. But I learned that my community who did see me wanted desperately to know what the right way to support me in that moment was. So reaching out to the people who are often in those spaces with you, and they're not always people who are supportive, and that is, you know, just another weight to bear. But when you have those people around, asking them and giving them tools about what would feel good to you. You know, if you told this person to fuck off, that would really help me. Or if you told this person, or maybe it's that, you know, your friend really can throw down and spar a debate on the spot, and you say, you know, if you want to take on every, you know, asshat we meet in the bar and just school them on help at every size, that is going to make me feel so empowered. And people were like, really? Oh, you know.
That's awesome.
That's awesome. I had some very fired up allies. So,
that's fantastic. And
I
think that's a great piece of advice to end the webinar on. We are at time. I cannot believe that we are done, because I think we could go on for quite some time. So on behalf of Reproaction and our attendees, I just want to thank Diane and Francis and Katie for this wonderful webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. And we will see you in the streets if we don't see you online. And thank you, as always, to my co-director for dealing with the webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys for having me.